She is one of the EU's most powerful faces. The woman known for slapping US big tech giants with multi-billion euro fines. The woman who former US President Donald Trump called the tax lady. My guest today is Mαργκρέτε Βεστάγκερ, the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, who will soon wave goodbye to Brussels after being in charge of competition and digital policies for almost 10 years. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will soon unveil the names of the 27 candidates who could become the next European commissioners. It appears that around 10 people out of the 27 are women. The European Parliament, following the European elections in June, experienced the biggest percentage drop in female representation since the first direct elections in 1979. How do you react to this backsliding, and what would you tell von der Leyen?
Well, I think it's, unfortunately, it's a demasking of the lack of efforts when it comes to equal opportunities and gender balance. Ursula von der Leyen, she asked I think, completely legitimate thing. Give me two candidates, a man and a woman. Then I will compose my commission so it's gender balanced and so that people have the competences needed. And I think, you know, every prime minister would say, I put my own government together. She's only asking for two people to choose from. And I think it's really a pity that member states do not follow through and gives her this opportunity to make the best possible commission and to make it gender balanced. Because we were making progress. We were, you know, also visually showing that a commission that is gender balanced is capable of doing, you know, unprecedented work, as we did in this mandate under the leadership of Ursula von der Leyen.
Why is it important to have more women inside the Parliament? You just answered this question, but why?
Well, first and foremost, you know, just a simple act of fairness that, of course, both genders should be taking part in leadership. Second, when you are in such dire straits as we are, we have multiple crises, we have things to deal with, the cost of living crisis, you know, the geopolitics, economic security. Of course, you should tap into the talent of both half of the population and not focus on one part of the population only, the male part of the population. You need all the talent that you can have. And you also need different life experiences to be reflected in the Commission. And you need to show boys and girls that this is what leadership looks like, men and women leading together.
If we stick to the news right now, the far right is rising everywhere in Europe. We have seen this on Sunday in Germany with the AfD. So do you fear that more governments with the far right in power, because this is what we are experiencing now, could totally undermine your efforts to regulate tech?
Well, the good thing about where we are right now is that we have the legislation in place. We have really strong legislation, both the Digital Markets Act, to make sure that the market is open and fair, and the Digital Services Act, to make sure that digital services are safe while preserving freedom of speech. And I think the important balances, they have been kept here. So even if a government may be hostile to some of the efforts, you know, it's the law. And we are a union built on the rule of law, so I think it will be very, very difficult, you know, to sway the course that we have taken to make sure that digital services actually is a service and not something that you get addicted to, that makes your life difficult, or that is used to undermine our democracy.
So you don't fear if the far right is really in government right now, you don't fear the consequences of what it could mean for tech?
Well, of course, if they manage to change national legislation, because the Digital Services Act doesn't say this is wrong, this is right, this you can say, this you cannot say. The Digital Services Act say you need to have this system in place. You need to make sure that your services cannot be harmful. You know, we've just had the back and forth with TikTok, who were presenting what we thought may be a harmful design, and they ended up not launching in Europe an addictive design. That are the obligations. But when it comes to what is harmful, encouraging to terrorism, to violence, bomb recipes, child abuse, harmful content, hate speech for that matter, that is for member states to assess. And if a member state, of course, roll back and say, you can say whatever you want about minority, you can excite people to violence, then, of course, we are on uncharted territory. Because what we have been doing in the last decade is to make progress. Making hate speech forbidden, making sure that minorities can safely participate. But that is member states' competence. And of course, they can roll it back.
Many of the big antitrust rulings that you launched between 2014 and 2019 were actually overturned in court. We know there's a final judgment coming up on your appeal in the Apple case. And commentators have said that you took a less prominent role in the second mandate. So how do you look back on this? And what exactly did you learn from these setbacks?
Well, there are very different sort of situations. In general, I must say we win most of our cases. Mm-hmm. Where we have lost cases is when we have had state aid cases where we fear that member states have given, sweetheart deals to some big companies that they don't have to pay the taxes that everybody else would have to pay. And one of the reasons why we had many more cases of that sort in the first mandate was, of course, that we wanted to see how the courts would assess this. Instead of just pressing on as fast as possible, we also need to see how will the court assess this. And of course, in parallel to the specific cases on state aid for tax purposes, we've seen how member states have changed their own legislation, how to prevent loopholes, to prevent aggressive tax planning. And we've also seen the international community taking steps for a minimum level of effective corporate taxation of 15%, for a sharing of revenue, so you pay your taxes where you actually make your revenue. So I think we have been making progress, but of course it would have been better for me in question to win the cases. But when you look at the antitrust cases and the cartel cases, here to a very large degree the courts confirm our approach.
Going back to competition rules, since this is your topic, there is a debate right now in Europe on competition rules, competition policy, and the need maybe to revise it, to reconsider the way EU deals with its own competition policies. Do you think it is possible to strike the right balance between protecting the European consumer, which you have done for many years, and at the same time strengthening the European industry? Do you see this? How do you see this balance?
Well, it depends a lot about what you mean about strength. Because, for instance, I see strength as having another supplier to choose if your preferred supplier fails you. That if one customer fails you, that you have other customers to turn to. And that is what competition gives you. That you have many suppliers to choose from, that you have access to markets where there are many customers to turn to if one is failing you. And for me, what we have seen is that if you're really competitive in the global market, it's because you have sort of exercised your competition muscle at home, because you're still being challenged. I think that there are a number of things that you can do in order to strengthen businesses. I think a good example are those sort of cross-border projects that we do. We have 4 in hydrogen, 2 in batteries, 2 in microelectronics, 1 in cloud, 1 in health. It's a total investment in cutting-edge innovation of 100 billion euros. So the same size as our Horizon research project, only in very specific sectors, cutting-edge innovation, and that helps European businesses to be able to deliver what we are asking from them. And I think that's a very good use of public funding, and that is a kind of industrial policy, if you want, that sort of helps the market move on, but doesn't limit competition. So I think it's really important not to see those two things as contradictions, but as seeing competition as one of the things that actually helps industry to be competitive in the global market.
So do you think these competition rules should be reconsidered, should be revised?
But it's really difficult to answer in general, because we have taken existing competition rules and then we have sort of enlarged the scope, not only to look for price increase, but also look for lack of innovation. For instance, if two pharma companies want to merge, well, then if there is a risk that the bigger one will close down the innovation in the smaller one in order to protect their cash cow, then of course we get concerned, because then consumers will not benefit from the innovation in this health sector, and patients may lose out. And that is existing old rules that we're pushing to use in innovative ways. And that, of course, I think is important to continue.
But the DSA asks platform to remove illegal content. What about harmful content? You mentioned it, but we talk about, sexism, disinformation, could be hate speech. We know that from one country to the other, definitions can change. So what do we do with harmful content?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's a very important realization that we have different cultures, also different political cultures. I think, for instance, in Denmark, the debate is much more sort of hard between people than in Sweden, where it's very civilized. And these cultural differences are among neighbors. So it's really important that you rely on the national setup. And when it comes to dealing with harmful content, we are happy if there is a code of conduct, that you use sort of soft law to manage what would otherwise be very difficult. Of course, in the end, what we are asking is to have a system put up so that you can deal with it. And then it will be for national courts eventually to say, well, this is actually harmful content, you need to deal with this. And this is maybe robust, maybe sometimes hurtful, but perfectly legitimate political discussion.
The arrest of Telegram CEO Pavel Durov in France, we know it has nothing to do with EU enforcement. But don't you think enforcement against big tech founders can only work if these bosses are personally liable, if you think that they should be the focus? And I'm speaking of X's founder, also Elon Musk.
Well, I think for me there are two different issues at stake here. So you have our legislation of competition law, the Digital Services Act, and then you have criminal law. And I think one should consider very carefully if you want to mix the two. I don't think that we would be more effective if we could sort of go for the CEO of a certain company. I think it's really important what we do here, where we have, the cases that we open, the potential fines that we can impose. And I think the speed and the resources that we put into this, that is actually the key to produce the change that citizens are waiting for, because this is what they have been promised for themselves, for their minors, for their kids.
The EU approach to enforcement of digital has been on a similar page as the Biden administration in the US. But what is the risk since we know we have elections in the US coming up now, what is the risk if the Democrat candidate, Kamala Harris, loses to the Republican candidate, we know who he is, Donald Trump? Don't you fear that this approach in the US will be reversed if it's Trump, and Europe and America will set on different tracks?
Well, I find that very difficult to assess, because if you look at what Kamala Harris is saying as a candidate for the presidency, she's saying, well, listen, we need prices to be affordable. We need to look at the level of concentration to address the cost of living crisis, which is also a fact of life, unfortunately, in the US. I think that is a very broad interest, because many voters are faced with increasing prices, and they don't understand why prices they don't come down just as fast as they went up. So to some degree, I think we may be sort of in a bipartisan move when it comes to this, because fair competition serves the voter in the role as a consumer. And that is not really political. That is, addressing everyday grievances by people who live a life where there are limitations to their budget.
Speaking of AI, the EU's focus has been on regulation, as you know better than I do. But why exactly are there no EU champions when it comes to AI?
Well, I would politely disagree with you, because we talk a lot about the AI Act for good reasons, since it's a global first. But we also have, the AI investment program. So huge funds, private and public, goes into AI innovation. We're in the process of enabling smaller companies to use our system of hyperscale computers. We now have 10, which is, state-of-the-art globally, to use that for the training of AI. We have, for instance, the French company Mistral, which is absolutely at par with others. And we have a lot of companies who develop AI that they put into their machinery. Can be, health equipment, can be cars, other kinds of automotive, can be all kinds of productive machinery. So I think the European approach is a bit different to what you see in the US, but we can not only catch up, but we can also set an agenda for the use of AI, where people can actually trust the technology, that it's being used to serve them and not to control them. And I think that's a very strong, future-proof European approach.
But on the list of the big AI giants today, there's no French AI, Italian AI firm. How do you explain this in some ways?
Well, first and foremost, the game is not over yet. There is still, I think, much more to come. One of the things that we need to secure in order for European AI businesses to have a fair chance is that they have access to capital. If you not access to capital, you cannot scale your business. And this is why, of course, we're pushing also for more public-private investment with less hoops that you have to go through in order to access that investment, sort of under the headline of patient capital for urgent needs. And there is idle capital out there who needs, I think, the encouragement of public funding coming in and saying, we will share with you part of the risk for these huge investments. And then all that European talent may have a fair chance also to be part of the AI race.
Mαργκρέτε Βεστάγκερ, there's a new commission that will emerge soon. What is your advice to the commissioner who will replace you?
Well, I think when I came in, I'm not a competition lawyer. I'm educated as an economist, and I've been working in politics for most of my life. And what I tried to do was not to be too scared or too impressed by all the clever lawyers around me, but to push for things that I found was really important. The fairness in the marketplace, that technology serves consumers and not the other way around. That market should be open and contestable. Because if you speak a language that you can understand yourself, then very often people can also understand it, and they will support you in your efforts to make sure that we, in our role as consumers, are being well served by the market.
Okay, I know this question has been asked to you many times in the past months, but I'll try to frame it in a way that makes it a little more special in some ways. What do you wish for after, when you leave the Commission? What is your wish? I'm not saying what's next for you.
No, I like that. That's a very nice way of framing it. Of course, you will know that we have very strict rules because we really do not have revolving doors. There's a 2-year limitation, and they are fully justified, I think. But I would hope that, my ambitions on behalf of Europe still can find, an outlet. I am ambitious and passionate about people having opportunities in a society that is getting still more digitalized. I think the geopolitics of this world is something that should encourage Europe to be much more engaged with the world around us. So, there are plenty of things that I would love to work with. And also, since it cannot be any difference, I look very much forward to it.
You mentioned geopolitics. Maybe that's one of your interests.
Thank
you so much, Mara.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you.